So Pam Harrington is going to move us over to Idaho, where she is with Trout Unlimited as their Southwest, restoration, Southwest Idaho Restoration Coordinator. She's been working with Trout Unlimited for the last 9 years, but formerly worked with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, funding water quality improvement projects, and before that was working for large corporations. So she's gone from large corporations to state governments to NGOs, and here she is.
Well, thanks for having me here today and for Trout Unlimited. This is exciting. It's great to talk about restoring the West, something we all have in common. And I got a fun presentation because we get to talk about fish a little bit. So I hope you enjoy it. First, I should tell you a little bit about Trout Unlimited in case you haven't heard of us. A lot of people think we're Ducks Unlimited, which drives us crazy sometimes, but we're a nonprofit, and we have about 200 employees around the country, but 150,000 members in 400 chapters, and that's really our strength. That's who we are. Lots of volunteers doing good things. So what do we do? Well, I'm one of the lucky ones. I get to go out in the field and work with ranchers, put projects on the ground. So we do the actual restoration work in the riparian areas. But then there's this other group that I sit with at the office, and they've got the boring job. And they're the scientists. But maybe some of you guys identify with that. So I'll be able to talk to you a little bit about what they have done to provide me with an idea of where the heck to work out there. So we've got some science, and then we've got the guys in DC that do the policy advocacy work, and that's important too. I mean, Trout Unlimited is one of the reasons that the Farm Bill is what it is right now. I can say that because I wasn't a part of it. But so we have that group, and then education and outreach for youth, and that's a lot of fun to get the little kids out there and make them work and plant trees. And of course, we work with willing landowners, and that, again, is part of my job, and that's a really fun part of my job. Okay, what don't we do? We don't buy land, we don't own any land or hold easements. We don't get into lawsuits unless we really have to. We're not a fight club. We don't force issues. And lastly, we get calls every week. We're just stock the fish. I want to fish. We don't stock fish. We like to say we like them native and wild. Okay, wild and native fish. Well, I'm not native, but I can be wild, so Trout Unlimited still took me on, so that's a good thing. But now we get down to what we're here today, and that's the Owyhees. And the Owyhee Watershed is enormous. If you haven't been over there, it's not too far from here. It's a very large, large watershed. In fact, it really is bigger than the state of Connecticut, and I think Rhode Island together. It's huge. But there's only 11,000 people there, opposed to 3.59 million in the state of Connecticut. So that's pretty cool. It's very sparsely populated. And as you can see, Barb Marshall had said it is the second largest desert in the United States. What am I working there for on trout, coldwater fish? It's a challenge. And of course, and that means that water is about the most important resource down there, both to men and any other animals. In fact, that statistic I gave you, 11,000 people, there's half as many bighorn sheep that live down there. So it really is a spectacular place to work and play. And then there's these little guys, the red-band trout. Now they're pretty special. They're a Columbia River Basin red-band trout, and trout that live in the desert. I mean, those are hard to find. So that's why we're interested in them, and guess what? They haven't been stocked over too much. They're pretty much wild, native fish. So that's our interest down there, to work with these fish. Again, I've accepted the mission to work on Coldwater Refugia in a desert. How am I going to find Coldwater Refugia down there in a place as big as the state of Connecticut? Well, luckily there's resources. And if you guys, a lot of you are researchers, scientists, you might want to take note of this publication. I call it the Book of Restoration for me down in the Owyhees. It's a primer on identifying coldwater refugia and protecting it. It's a great publication, just came out in 2012 from EPA. Here's a little excerpt from this Book of Restoration, and it shows, I know you can't see the slide that well, but right down here is a little salmon, actually, in this example, and he's out there in the middle of this stream without any cover because he found a seep. So an upwelling where the water is actually 2 degrees centigrade cooler than the whole rest of the stream. So he's choosing to put his life on the line and be out there because it's just a little bit cooler and he needs it. How am I going to find those kind of places? That's a big challenge. But there's some things that you can look at and look at the topography where you can find spring brooks and gaining reaches just from the topography. So I want to form a wanted list. Where is it I want to work? Biggest bang for the buck, right? To help these fish. So we need to prioritize and narrow it down. That's where I bring the science team in. Let me see if I skipped one. No, I didn't yet. Okay, so the science team, those guys that sit in their offices and have to work hard all day, they go through and look at all of the data that others have put together, and they try and create a marriage between landscape scale measurements of stream temperature, vegetation, and where trout are found, their distribution in abundance. I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done out there, and we capitalize on it. We don't try and redo all the work that many good researchers have already done. We compile it. And in the end, we put it into what we call TU's Conservation Success Index. That's where we can try and formulate a strategy on where things are going to work out the best over time based on all the data that's been collected. So I like to call the science team my detectives. They go out, they find the clues, they put them together for me, and I get to go play out here. So working with these guys, they put together at least a course scale of where I should maybe focus my efforts. But of course, I have to buy them beer. That works out all right. So capturing the clues. They're maybe not as animated as this guy, but they do. They uncover what it is we need to look for through all that data to give us an idea of where the coldwater refuge might lie in a huge landscape that's hard to get around in. So like I said, they use the data that's been gathered from, all the alphabet agencies, everybody that's had a stake in the game. And some data is better than others, but we put it all together and try and make sense of it. And here's the clues then, kind of broken out by categories. And certain agencies concentrate more on others, on different factors. So climate factors, and that would be your temperatures, August being the most critical month for coldwater fish, right? So put that together. Rocky Mountain Research Station has done a great job of using some temperature tools and predictor models. And then there's the physical characteristics. And that part's kind of fun. You can look on the map even and see the elevations and longitudes that would be more conducive to coldwater fish. I mean, down in the valleys, they're gone. We have to go up higher in elevation, really, to look for these fish now. Gradient and aspect, I mean, that makes sense. If you have shade, north-facing slope, that kind of thing. And then riparian shading, Riparian shading, I'll go into in a little bit more detail here because I know we're all here for the riparian area, and we've been working on that along with beaver impoundments. I think we've heard a lot about that, and we're going to hear more later on how important those are for fish. And then diversions and dams. We'll look into those too when we use this Conservation Success Index to tell Pam where she ought to be working. So I really threw this slide in just so I could put another pretty picture in. It's nice, huh? I didn't take it, but Canyon walls provide shade too. So they're important too when we're looking at where's the biggest bang for our buck. We've got natural shade there that I don't think is going away anytime soon. So that's a good thing. And then the elevation, like I said, has to be a little bit higher for coldwater fish. And also, if smallmouth bass have moved in, I'm kind of told by Fish and Game, and I'll move on, look somewhere else, because they're an invasive that nobody's gotten a handle on yet. So that we do consider if there's a lot of smallmouth bass in an otherwise pretty nice place, I'll look elsewhere for now. And honestly, we're kind of culling places and looking for places that will be strongholds into the future at this point in time. See, otherwise, I guess maybe someday we'll be called Bass Unlimited. Hopefully not. Okay, so now to the riparian. I said I'd talk a little bit about that because that's why we're all here. Well, the scientists in the office have been looking at nape imagery. You know how good it is nowadays. We can kind of take a tour on our own at our desk before getting out there, and that's really helpful. But what does it tell us about trout when we're looking at a bunch of vegetation? I mean, what does it really tell us? So they look at the imagery, and then they classify the riparian vegetation that they're looking at, because you can tell the differences using this good imagery. You can really see it. You can see where the woody riparian is, and you can see the emergence, sagebrush or bare ground. All of that is pretty apparent. So it puts together more clues in the puzzle. And there it is. This is a secret weapon of our detectives, and you guys should know about it now. And it's a certain software called Analyst or Feature Analyst. If you've heard of that, it's a GIS program that actually will go ahead and compile all that for you. It'll be able to tell through the aerial photos what kind of riparian vegetation you're really looking at. Which one do you think the fish prefers? Which one would red band trout be most likely associated with on this grouping? And guess what? It works. I mean, from the population data that we have versus this, there's a marriage. It's working. I'll tell you what it is. It's a woody riparian. Was that your guess? Probably. Kind of tells you that there's probably water there a little longer when you're getting woody riparian vegetation in place. Okay, so here's another clue that they're tackling for me. Besides, where is the good riparian vegetation? How about temperatures? Remember, these are cold water fish. We're writing off places that are too warm now because there's a lot of places that will have a better chance at protecting or enhancing. So working with the Rocky Mountain Research Station, we've gotten and combined a lot of data on predictors on what temperatures are going to look like into the future as well. And then we went ahead and added a few, this was to get the scientists out of the office, I think. Put another 80 locations, temperature monitors in where there was data gaps, which would correspond to where we think there would be red band trout as well. So we've got 80 more monitors out there right now. And it's pretty cool, those little tidbits can stay out there for 4 years, and they take a temperature reading every hour for 4 years, in wintertime too. So, and I guess I should mention this in case any of you guys are doing this type of work. I mean, we use the protocols from the Forest Service on how you epoxy those little tidbits onto the rocks so they stay put, because it's really easy to lose them if we ever get another high spring flow of any magnitude on these streams. Okay, so there it is. There's all of this data that the scientists have collected for me and for other TU people that are working in other watersheds. And then they put it into this conservation success index model. So they look at the distribution of the fish that have already been mapped out, and then the density, how robust it is, the genetic status. Are they really wild and native, or are they been introgressed? And then the watershed condition, And then also looking at land stewardship and what's it going to look like into the future. Well, in the Owyhees, I'm not seeing a bunch of high-rises being built or anything like that. But anyway, this is what they put this together, all of the data into, and come up with a score for watersheds on where I should be working. So, given all of that data, then I've got to go out there and see what I can find out on the ground, kind of ground truth, where they've told me might be good to look. All right, there is that missing GIS layer, isn't there? Willing landowners. Nobody's put that into the model yet. That's okay, that's what I'm for. Anyway, working with people that would like to do projects, conservation projects for fish, and there's lots of them out there, but then we have to overlay that with where are the best places for us to work. And models can't match a landowner's knowledge of their own land, or the ones that really want to help trout to continue to survive in that landscape. So that said, I had to get boots on the ground and start on a project. Well, I called a friend of mine. His name's Jerry Hoagland. He's a county commissioner in Owyhee County. I said, Jerry, we got this project. I'm looking for coldwater seeps. I'm looking for places where there's still water present when everything dries up. And he said, that sounds like my ranch. Okay, so we started there. Reynolds Creek, which is really cool because that's an experimental watershed. Likely most of you have heard of it. It's one of the, I think it's second in the nation, maybe the first for an experimental watershed. Well, what happens on Reynolds Creek and so many other places in the Owyhees is it dries up. But there'll be little pools left. And the fish will hang out in there and wait. There's your Coldwater Refugia. And usually it has been aligning with all that computer modeling we're doing for the most part. But drilling down to this level, you got to get out there. So you can't read that temperature gauge probably, but this day when I took this reading, it was 104 degrees out. It was so hot. And that water was 59.3 degrees. So it's upwelling. It's coming up from groundwater, and that's why it's staying cool. This is what we're looking for, and this is what we're trying to protect. So this is one section of Reynolds Creek. And there it was in April, and on the right, there it is in July. Big difference in the amount of water that's available. And there was probably, all right, I'm a fisherman too. I'll say there was 20 fish in there. But there was probably 10 red bands waiting, hoping that the rains would come and they can move again. Sometimes it doesn't, and the hole dries up and they die. But sometimes it holds on. Here's an example of those fish. Again, there's no cover here, but these fish are there because there's water and it's fairly cold. So, moving on, there's not a lot of money really for red band trout projects. Luckily, they're not endangered or anything like that. We can find bits here and there, but when you can maybe partner up with another species that has quite a bit of money thrown its way, that's good for everybody, right? So the junipers have been an issue for sage grouse. How can we use those for trout? We used them in our revetments. So stabilizing banks, providing cover, they're chopping the trees down for the birds, we'll take them and use them for the fish. That's what we've been doing now and again when we have a chance to maybe stabilize a cut bank, lay it back. Just an example of a project. Oh, now this is good news. We're visiting with the Shoshone-Paiute tribe down in Duck Valley, and they've been doing a lot on their own for many years. I know it looks a little hammered up there at the off-site water, but that happens around off-site water some. But that allows the cows to go get their water there instead of on the creek. And they have a really cool, if anyone wants to know more about this, I can tell you more about the pump system they have that's operated just by a solar panel, no batteries. And anyway, it's pretty cool. And the other thing they've been doing, and this is funny, we're all talking about beaver restoration and adding beaver where we can. And I went and talked to these guys, and they said, well, Pam, we've been doing that for years. When you do, make sure you trap them as a family and bring them over, otherwise they won't want to stay. So they've been doing this for decades, taking care of their land using beaver. So we'll be working with them on red band projects as well, but they have another motive why they want to work with me on red band projects. And I don't know how many of you know that this tribe was a salmon-eating tribe down in Nevada. How many people knew there used to be salmon in Nevada? Whoa, not very many. Wow, I'm glad I mentioned it then, because that's one thing the tribe asked me to do as TU. They said, can you get the word out that there used to be salmon down here? We relied on them. We ate the salmon. And once the, what was it called? The Indian Reorganization Act of, I can't remember the date, sorry, 18-something was passed. They were given Duck Valley because of the salmon runs that came through. 4 years later, the Owyhee Dam was built, and there's no more salmon. So they're hopeful. They have this long-term vision that most of us don't have. And they say, that's okay, we'll work with you on red band projects because that will help to put the restoration and infrastructure in for salmon when they maybe come back in 100 years. So they have a 100-year outlook to say maybe salmon will come back someday. So that's kind of exciting too. So there's no silver bullet to this. It depends on what a landowner wants. It depends what is needed. There's all kinds of tools for us to use to try and keep water in the stream longer through the hot months. There's just an example of some of them. But do I have time for some questions then? I think I got a couple minutes. Thanks. Oh, that was nice and clear, no questions. I'm just kidding if you have any. No? Okay. Oh, there's one. Good.
So the connection between riparian areas or riparian cover and fish, it's temperature. Have you also looked at food web effects to see if there are, the community that the fish are surrounding?
Oh yeah, there's absolutely food web effects between riparian vegetation and trout. A lot of the better food require the woody debris, wood in a stream, not sediment laden streams. Bugs can't live in that. So yeah, there's definitely a correlation between the two. Okay, thank you.